Hello, my name is Julie, and today I'm going to be talking about what books you should read if you like Dimension 20. It's been a long time since I did a recommendation video. Most of the time when I do a book recommendation list, I put that on my Instagram, like these different lists. And if you'd like to see more of those, definitely check out my Instagram, but let me know if you want to see more of them here, because today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite things on the internet and books that have to do with it, and that is Dropout's Dimension 20. Because actual play games and books are some of my favorite storytelling formats, I thought I would combine them today and give you what books you should read based on your favorite Dimension 20 seasons. Dimension 20 is an actual play TTRPG, which usually runs on Dungeons & Dragons 5e, and is usually hosted by Brennan Lee Mulligan, who is one of my favorite people on the internet. One of the things that is unique about Dimension 20 is that it is an anthology series, so every season is an entirely new story, with the exception of a couple of seasons getting sequels. And also, it is not set in a traditional D&D setting. The majority of these seasons are entirely unique worlds and settings that haven't really been seen in this type of format before. So a usual season of Dimension 20 is DM'd by Brennan Lee Mulligan, and it has a set cast of 6 comedians and improv pros: Lou Wilson, Emily Axford, Brian Murphy, Zach Oyama, Allie Beardsley, and Siobhan Thompson, who are all college humor people who I have adored for years and loved seeing them do this. They've had 5 different seasons together with some sequel seasons as well. Currently, Fantasy High Junior Year is coming out, and I have been having so much fun with it. But in the interim between these longer seasons that are 15 to 20 episodes long, there are side quests as well, with Brennan DMing guests. That could be 4 or 6 people, or a guest DM coming in. And we just have a bunch of comedians coming together to make Dungeons & Dragons. Dimension 20 is available on Dropout, which is a streaming service that I am not sponsored by, but I wish I was, because it's the best $5 I spend a month. But if you would like to taste test any of these seasons, the first episode of every season is available on YouTube for free. So I'm going to go through the majority of the seasons that I have seen. There's a couple that I don't have on here that are like sequels or whatever. Give you a pitch of that season and also a few books that you should read if you like that. So if you've read the book, maybe you have a Dimension 20 season to check out, or if you've watched the Dimension 20, you have a couple books you can check out. I'm going to start off strong with the first season of Dimension 20, and that is Fantasy High, which the pitch of this is: what if John Hughes ran a D&D campaign? In a regular D&D world, there is one nation called Solace that has modern technology and is a home for all types of people. And 6 different teenagers are starting their first day at the Eggfort Adventuring Academy to become the best adventurers they can be. And all of those kids are immediately put in detention and called the bad kids. Fantasy High has 3 regular seasons. The 3rd one is airing right now, and it also has 2 different spin-off seasons. When I think Fantasy High, I think found family. I think high school teenagers, a group of friends coming together to solve a mystery, fight bad guys. It's the most traditional to the D&D setting because it has all of the creatures that D&D has, but it also has cell phones. So it was a little bit of a hard balance to hit with these recommendations, but the first one I'm going to say is Percy Jack. Actually, wait, I have the book right here. I didn't realize I had the book with me. I don't normally have it with me. And that is Percy Jackson. This was so formative for me growing up, but I think this is the ultimate teenage group of friends with superpowers go on an adventure. This is as close as you're gonna get to Fantasy High. The humor in here is unparalleled, and I think it really bounces off nicely with how Fantasy High is also heavily comedic. And if you don't know what Percy Jackson's about, where have you been? But Percy Jackson is a 12-year-old who has been kicked out of a ton of schools, is about to be kicked out of another one, and he finds out that his father is a Greek god, and he has been tracked down by monsters and has to survive so he can prove himself to the gods. Maybe Heroes of Olympus might be a little bit more of a parallel because of the age of the characters, but this is where you start. The second book I have to recommend for Fantasy High is one of my favorite YA series of all time, and that is The Raven Boys. When I think found family, when I think coming of age but also solving a mystery, when I think magical realism, I think of The Raven Boys. This is a quartet about a girl named Blue Sargent who comes from a family of mystics, but she's the only one who doesn't have any powers, of course. She meets these 4 boys from a very rich prep school, and she gets wrapped up in the leader's quest to find a Welsh king. When it comes to the high school found family, I think this is the closest you'll get to Fantasy High. The third book I'm going to recommend to you is Legends and Lattes. I haven't actually read this book yet, but I have read the prequel, so I've had the taste of the setting, which is why I'm recommending it. And that is because this is set in a D&D setting, even if it is a cozy book. We follow our main character, Viv, who is an orc who wants to stop being a soldier and start opening a coffee shop. If you really like the setting of Fantasy High and the D&D world of having a bunch of different races, this setting will be great for you. And the last book I have for Fantasy High, I think is a little bit of a departure, but it is one of the most iconic found family books of teenagers, all with different skills, trying to take people down and solve a mystery, and that's Six of Crows. So Six of Crows is in a Russian-inspired fantasy world where 6 different young people are coming together to pull off the ultimate heist. I like that we have all of these different characters who are young people that all have different skills in this Ocean's 11 type fantasy, which is similar to what we have in Fantasy High, with everybody having their own different skills, and also some of the complicated relationships that people have with their parents are in both. On to the second season, and that is the Unsleeping City. This is a magical New York City story, which don't we all love? I've never even been to New York. This is about a New York in which there is a 6th borough, which is the dream world, which is a culmination of all of the dreams of the people who live in New York City. And there is a evil person who is trying to bring the dream world into the real world, which will have catastrophic repercussions. We follow a hospital nurse, we follow a Broadway legend, a drug dealer, a hairstylist slash recent divorcee, a firefighter, and a literal sewer rat. Unsleeping City also has a second season. I decided to pick 4 different sci-fi fantasy books that take place in New York City. The first book is An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. This is a science fiction about our main character, April May, who just happens to come across in the middle of the night a statue that she's never seen before, just decides to film a goofy YouTube video about it, and then it ends up going viral because a bunch of those statues have appeared all over the world. And she very suddenly becomes the face of these statues. What do they mean? They must be alien. What do we do about them? And she becomes sucked into that political world, while there's also more scientific and magical things that are going on with these aliens that are entrancing the world. But this matches the comedy of Dimension 20 so well in fact, that the author was invited to be on a later season of Dimension 20, which I will talk about later. This has the same balance between the absurd and the metaphorical that the Unsleeping City has as well. Then I have The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. Just like the Unsleeping City, this is about what happens when cities become so big of a place that it creates its own magic. And there is a giant eldritch horror that's going to try to attack New York City, and there are 5 different people who are chosen, 1 from each borough, and they're gonna have to come together to fight this eldritch horror. This has almost the exact same premise as Unsleeping City, so it is a crime if you like one and don't try the other. Number 3 is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, which is about a girl who in the medieval ages ran away from her wedding and made a deal with a demon that she wanted to be able to be free to do whatever she wanted. But the curse that he actually gave her was that she is immortal, but no one will ever remember her. So she has a conversation with the person, they step away for a second and come back, they don't remember who she is, and she has just lived throughout the centuries by herself. And she is now in modern New York, and somebody finally remembers her. So this does take place in New York. It's a little bit magical. We have an immortal character, which is something that we see in Unsleeping City as well. But I think that this takes the sentimental side of the things in Unsleeping City. I think they hit the same notes. And lastly, I have One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston, which is a rom-com about our main character who is from a small town, moves to New York City to shake up her life and also maybe investigate more about the death of her brother, when she goes on the Q train and meets this beautiful woman, and it turns out this woman is stuck in time from the 80s on the Q train and can't leave and hasn't figured out how to fix it. There is queer found family in this book with the roommates that our main character has, and there is a romance, magical realism in New York, the love of New York, all of that is here. Next up is the masterpiece that is A Crown of Candy. Let me pitch this so well. Game of Thrones meets Candyland. It is the brutality and politics of Game of Thrones, but set in a food-themed world, which sets you up for ridiculousness. Our main characters are the royal family and their guards of Candia. So the king is literally rock candy. His daughters are licorice, and the guard is a gummy bear. And A Crown of Candy does not have any sequel seasons, but it does have a side quest prequel season called The Ravening War, which was DM'd by Matt Mercer. This is the most brutal of the seasons. People are constantly on death's door, and none of the PCs are safe at any time. Because this has such high stakes, the comedy is even more absurd. So I think it was hard for me to find something that hit the balance of Game of Thrones while also being comedic, so I mostly just went for basically the most brutal fantasy that I've read, like the most grim. First off, of course, Game of Thrones, the thing that this season is based on. Game of Thrones is one of my favorite series. George R.R. Martin, would you please write another book or just give it to Brandon Sanderson? The second book is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This is a historical fantasy trilogy inspired by the Rape of Nanjing, but it is also inspired by Chinese mythology, where we have our main character Rin, who has worked herself to the bone to get into this magical war college so that she can become a warrior and change her station, because it's the only available avenue for her. And she immediately, as a young person, gets thrust into a more brutal war than anyone could have anticipated. And this series really shows the brutality of wartime and the dark side of a lot of the things that people might otherwise like in fantasy and overlook how they are traumatic and terrible. Then we've got She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. This is inspired by the rise of the Ming Dynasty. So we have our main character who, her brother was destined for greatness and she was destined for nothingness, but when her entire village dies, including her brother, she takes on her brother's identity and decides to go to the monastery where he was supposed to go, and she just starts climbing the ranks. This is very queer, this is very brutal, the fantasy elements, the political elements of it, so good. The second book in particular talks about the toll that war and conflict and politicking has on people in such a poignant way. And the last book that I have for Crown of Candy is Jade City by Fonda Lee, which I almost picked this for Unsleeping City because it is an urban fantasy, but I think the tone of it matches Crown of Candy better. So this is an urban fantasy. It is very similar to the real world. It takes place almost in like the equivalent of like the 80s. All the countries are fictional, but is inspired by Japan. And we have two rival gang families who are trying to take over this city from each other, locked in a stalemate. Jade gives them power, but it also can drive you mad. I also wanted to pick this because all of the people that we follow are family members, just like the people that we follow in A Crown of Candy. The fourth unique Intrepid Heroes series, or the regular length series, is a Starstruck Odyssey, which is set in the world of the Starstruck comics, which was actually created by Brennan's mother. You don't have to have read any of that to enjoy this series, but this is an absurdist, retro-futuristic space opera where we follow a crew of bounty hunters on the ship called the Red Hot, and they are all just struggling to survive in a world that is raking them over the coals. They are constantly scrounging for money, and it is the most consistently comedic of all of the seasons. This season is absurd, and so I decided to pick sci-fi books that are set in space and can also be comedic. The number one book to recommend is the Illuminae Files. So this is a YA sci-fi series starting with Illuminae. It is a collection of files. So it is mixed media, we have transcripts, we have maps, we have all these different types of media in there compiled about this sort of conspiracy that has happened. And in the first book, there is a ship that is taking off from a planet that has just been bombed by a giant corporation, and there is a countdown as the ship of the corporation is catching up. Meanwhile, our two main characters broke up the day that the ship took off, and now they have to work together despite having just broken up. The second book, Gemina, I have to recommend for this because one of our main characters is very similar to something that's happening in Gemina. Then we have one of the most popular comedic sci-fis, and that is the Murderbot series. So this is a series of novellas. It just got its first novel, but it is about a robot called Murderbot that thinks of itself as a killer and cold-hearted, but really it's just a sweet robot that wants to take care of its crew. All Murderbot wants to do is watch its reality TV shows, and I don't blame it. Then we have the Locked Tomb series, starting with Gideon the Ninth. This is one of the most unique books I've ever read, especially when it comes to tone. The pitch for this book is usually lesbian necromancers in space, and we have a sci-fi setting, but like fantasy politics with lots of horror and gothic tone, but also random absurdist comedy. So strange. And I think if the comedy of this worked, I think you might like Starstruck Odyssey. And the last one I have is a memory called Empire. This is less comedic than the other ones, but it's one of my favorite sci-fi books that I've read recently. Our main character is an envoy for a small space station, which I think matches the sort of settings that we do see in Starstruck Odyssey. And when her predecessor is murdered, she has to go without his memories that she was going to be dependent on to try to solve his murder while also trying not to be killed. So the running away from being murdered thing, the mystery solving part, and the Empire's encroaching on other people, I think that's where that comparison is. And the last of the unique regular length series is Never After, which is fairy tale horror, which is always a great combination to have. This is inspired by classic fairy tale characters. Our main characters are Sleeping Beauty, Mother Goose, Pinocchio, Puss in Boots, the Frog Prince, and Little Red Riding Hood. And they are all finding themselves in much more horrific versions of their stories than we know. Like even more than Grimm Brothers or whatever the original roots of those stories are. And they are trying to bring their stories to what they should be and to happily ever after. I would say I'm becoming a horror book fan, and I really loved the world building in the series. You know what, I'm gonna give you a pitch for each of the seasons. If you want to be in it for the characters, you should watch Fantasy High. If you want to be in it for the themes, you should watch Unsleeping City. If you want to be in it for the stakes and the action, you should watch Crown of Candy. If you want to be in it for the comedy, you should watch Starstruck Odyssey. And if you want to be in it for the world building and lore, you should watch Never After. Because this is the horror season, I decided to pick horror-y books that also had to do with storytelling. So, of course, I have to talk about my favorite book of all time, Bunny. Bunny is my favorite book. This is about our main character, Sam, who is one of the only people in her creative writing MFA program at a really elite university. She is the only one who is not in this clique of rich, pretty girls who all love each other a creepy amount, and she finally gets invited to join them for one of their soirees, and she very quickly finds herself over her head. So this is about a love of creation and fiction, the mindset of being a writer and creator, and how that can take you away from the real world. I think the horror elements of this are pretty similar to what we see in Never After, and also the bit of like, what's real. It's tied for my favorite book of all time, so of course I'm gonna recommend it. Then we have a book that I read with my book club. It was voted on by the members, and I hadn't heard of it before, but was very surprised with. And that is Vita Nostra by Marina and Sergei Dyachenko. I don't know how to pronounce their last name. This is one of the weirdest fucking books I have ever read. And it is about a girl who doesn't really know what she wants to do with her life, but she is come upon by this strange man who starts blackmailing her into doing things she doesn't want to do. And once she completes all of these things, he says, okay, great, you're going to go to this creepy university you've never heard of. And she gets there and she is put in with all of these other people that they have to learn how language works backwards and forwards, and nobody really understands the assignments that they're being given because they seem impossible, and nobody really knows what's going on. What are they working towards? If you finish this book, it makes sense why I would pick it for this. Then I'm also going to pick Middle Game by Seanan McGuire. This is a book that is inspired by alchemy, where two twins were created and then separated. They're both child prodigies, one in math and one in language, and they accidentally meet when both attending Berkeley, start to realize the connections between the two, and the world starts bending around them. I think the wibbly wobbly, unstable reality part of this book is kind of similar to some of the things that you might see in Never After that made my jaw drop on the floor. Brennan, what the fuck? And the last one, possibly my best recommendation here, is Coraline. I think this must have been one of like the look inspirations for Never After when you start looking at like the art that they did. Coraline freaked me out so much as a kid, but this is a young adult book. It was turned into a movie about a girl named Coraline who moves into a new creepy house and finds a portal to another world in which her parents are more what she wants them to be, but are they? If you love the vibes of Coraline and you can handle some gore that wasn't in Coraline, because obviously this is for adult audiences, not for children, I think that Never After is for you. And now I'm going to talk about 3 of the side quest seasons. So these are all shorter seasons with different guests. Not all of the original cast members are in it. The first I'm going to talk about is A Court of Fae and Flowers. This is DM'd by Apriya Iyengar. It has 3 of the cast members from the Intrepid Hero seasons. It has Brennan Lee Mulligan as a PC, it has Emily Axford and Lou Wilson, as well as Oscar Montoya, Oma Najam, and Serena Marie. This is Regency meets Fae, where we have a bunch of different Fae from different courts, like the Goblin Court and the Unseelie Court, coming together for this big celebration called the Bloom that happens annually or something like that. And there are rumors that this is going to be the last bloom. So all of these characters are looking to scrounge up power for themselves and also maybe find love and themselves. So for the Regency part of this, I have to recommend my other favorite book of all time, and that is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This has been my favorite book since I read it in 7th grade. It is about our main character, Elizabeth, who comes from a family of all girls, and her mother is pushing all of the girls to get married as soon as possible so that they can secure their futures, and Elizabeth runs into the extremely rich Mr. Darcy, who is also very rude, and they sort of keep orbiting each other. Even though this book is hundreds of years old, the humor of it still holds up, and a lot of the Regency sentimentality that is in the Regency genre is adapted into A Court of Fey and Flowers. Then we have a book that I just finished, and that is the Wisteria Society for Lady Scoundrels. Magic has allowed pirating to change immensely. So instead of having ships that men sail, anyone, including women, and especially women, are now enchanting their own houses to move around the countryside. There is, of course, this Wisteria Society of women who are pirates, so they steal and cheat and lie, but they are also still Regency ladies who have weird particular things that they're sensitive about, or that they think are faux pas, even though they do all these things that are illegal. And this is also a romance book, so a romance for the main character with a pirate who is sent to kill her is also something that ties into the romances in A Court of Fey and Flowers. Then we have a very similar title to Wisteria Society, and that is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, which is one of my favorite books that I read last year. This is a modern day magical realism where witches have kind of gone into hiding, and our main character really wants to connect with other witches, and she has a YouTube channel pretending that she is a witch, even though she is one, and protectors of some witch children have found her and ask her to help raise them to understand their magic. The found family, finding yourself, accepting yourself elements of this book match A Court of Fey and Flowers note for note. There's also a romance in it, there's a good amount of comedy, and it's ultimately about accepting yourself. Then we also have a copy that I just got, The House in the Cerulean Sea. I just got this from a little free library. This is about an orphanage for magical children who people think are demon spawn, so they're sent away, and our main character, Arthur, is like a child support officer and is checking to make sure these children are being taken care of. And of course someone will fall in love along the way, and people will accept themselves. So I think all four of these books fall into line with the type of stuff you'll see in A Court of Fey and Flowers. Then we have the most recent one that I watched, and that is Burrow's End. This is again DM'd by Abria Iyengar. It is 10 episodes long, and our PCs are Brennan Lee Mulligan, Siobhan Thompson, Izzy Rowland, Rashawn Scott, Erica Ishii, and Jasper William Cartwright. This is heavily inspired by Watership Down, but it also has more horror elements to it, a little bit of like gore, rot horror, but also type of dystopian horror. There's a little bit of everything in this, and this season just absolutely blew me away, and I think it is the best of the side quest seasons. We follow a family of stoats, which is kind of similar to a weasel, who have been chased away from their burrow and have to find somewhere new to live. They keep encountering all these different horrors and also are trying to figure out what the source is of the magic that they're coming across. So of course, this season was very heavily inspired by Watership Down, so if you liked one, you should read the other. I would also recommend What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher, especially if you really like the horror. Like, if you like this cover, this is a season that you should be watching. This is a reimagining of The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe, which is such a short story that should have been expanded upon, and I'm so glad that T. Kingfisher did. This is about a non-binary soldier from a fictional country who is invited to the house of a friend whose sister is dying in hopes that our main character might help. And as you can imagine, shit gets weird from this cover. This is a novella, so it won't take you very long to finish, just like this season is relatively short compared to the others. Then we have another weird fiction book, one of my favorite books of all time, and that is Sorrowland by Rivers Solomon. How to describe this book? This is about our main character, Vern, who grew up in a cult, and she, as a 16-year-old, very heavily pregnant with twins, escapes the cult and gives birth in the woods and starts to raise her children in the woods by themselves. But she also starts to notice different things about her body changing. This is one of the most incredible books I've ever read in my entire life. It is one of the most unique. The way that Vern is characterized, the way that we get to know her so deeply is incredible. I love her journey. I love how important her family is to her, the children are. We also get a lot of flipping back to what this cult was like and what they actually did to her. And it is so incredible. Please read this book. Half of the things that I just said about this book are true for this season. It's got that weird horror of people changing. It's got a lot of things about family and survival and who can you trust. So good. And the last book that I'm going to talk about for Burrow's End is Severance by Ling Ma. This is a dystopian literary fiction about a very strange apocalypse. Our main character, Candace, is a worker in the publish industry, but she is very low down, isn't doing what she wants. Very slowly, this zombie apocalypse essentially starts, but she is in denial of it, and so are a lot of people. And the zombies here are very strange because they don't attack anybody. They aren't hurting anyone. They just keep repeating the same mundane actions they would do every day over and over and over again. A lot of the themes of like what's important, I think, could be connected between these, but this is also one of the weirder dystopian apocalypse-y type stories that I've read. And the last season I'm going to talk about is Mentopolis, which is the most recent season to be finished, the most recent side quest. It does have Brennan Lee Mulligan DMing, but instead of doing D&D 5e like most of these seasons are, this is run with a system called Kids on Bikes. Our cast members are Freddie Wong, Danielle Radford, Hank Green, Siobhan Thompson, Mike Trapp, and Alex Songsha. This is Inside Out meets noir. So it is only 6 episodes. It is run pretty differently from the other seasons. It is more about investigating and learning all that they can. All of these characters are different parts of a scientist's brain. This scientist has been in some sort of conspiracy and is trying to decide if he wants to take it down. And all of these different characters are things like his impulse, his curiosity, his conscience, and they are all working at the speed of thought in his mind, which is set up like a noir city. So I decided to pick some different mystery books that I could tie to this season. The first is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. This is one of the most unique mystery books that I've ever read, and it is inspired by Agatha Christie novels and that sort of whodunit of a large cast of characters all in a mansion trying to figure out who the murderer is, but it has a time travel twist where our main character is stuck in this sort of loop where he has 7 loops of this day of Evelyn Hardcastle being murdered to figure out who does it. And he experiences each day in the mind of a different person. And I think this has a pretty similar tone to Mentopolis and the sort of vibe that it's going for. I also have Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. This is like one of the first mystery thrillers that I really remember reading and enjoying when it comes to adult books. And I picked this because of the sort of gothic, isolated in a city nature of it. Our main character is hired to be an apartment sitter in a very famous building in New York City, and the residents of this apartment building are very strange, and it seems like there's a lot more going on. So this is a little bit more of a traditional mystery thriller, but I think that the setting and like the aesthetic of this kind of matches Mentopolis. Then I picked The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman because this is the funniest mystery book that I've liked. This is about a group of septuagenarians in a retirement community, and they have a Thursday murder club where they put together different information about cold cases that have happened and try to solve them. But then an actual murder happens right nearby them and they're gonna solve it. I think this is fun as a group of mystery solvers who all have their own strengths, and also it has the comedic chops that we also see in Mentopolis. And the last book that I'm going to recommend was one of my favorite mystery thrillers back in the day, and that is The Woman in the Window by A.J. Finn. And this is about a woman who has agoraphobia. She cannot leave her house. She is too afraid to. She will collapse. And she believes that she has witnessed the murder of one of her neighbors, but she can't really prove it, so she's trying to put the pieces together. This is inspired by the movie Rear Window from Alfred Hitchcock, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. It has this agoraphobic feel of our main character can't leave this dark place. She's an alcoholic. She's not really sure what's actually going on, and that dark noir feel that it borrows from Rear Window is also one of the things that inspired Mintopolis. So that is my last recommendation for the last season that I'm going to be talking about. Let me know, have you watched Dimension 20? Will you watch Dimension 20 now? Have you read any of these books? Do you think they match up with the series that I mentioned? If you have watched any of these Dimension 20 seasons, I would love you to tell me what books you would recommend to me based on my love of them. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to follow me anywhere, including my Instagram, my Goodreads, my book club, my Etsy, where I have bookish crochet dolls and reader spreadsheets, you can find all of that in the singular link down below. And as always, I will see you in the next one.